Listen closely, because what they're seeing now wasn't supposed to happen. They aimed at you with doubt, jealousy, pressure, fear, every cheap weapon they had. But something's wrong. Every hit they send doesn't weaken you, it rebounds. Like you're wrapped in an invisible force field they can't study, can't break, can't explain. The harder they push, the faster they collapse under their own weight. You didn't fight back. You didn't chase revenge. You just stood there, calm, focused, smiling inside, while their attacks quietly turned into self-destruction. That's the kind of power that terrifies people. Not loud, not chaotic, surgical. When someone realizes they can't harm you anymore, the game changes completely. They thought an attack was supposed to hurt you, slow you down, leave a mark, something visible they could point at and laugh about later. But every time they aimed their words, their plans, their little coordinated strikes in your direction, something strange happened. Something they didn't account for. The energy never stayed with you. It never settled. It never poisoned your mind. It bounced back sharper, heavier, more precise, like gravity suddenly remembered who it worked for. Because when you don't panic, when you don't flinch, when you don't rush to explain yourself, pressure has nowhere to live. It has to return to the sender. And they felt it first as confusion, then as frustration, then as exhaustion, because nothing is more tiring than fighting someone who isn't bleeding the way you expected. They kept escalating, louder attacks, sneakier moves, emotional traps, public shots mixed with private whispers. But every level they went up only exposed how fragile they were underneath, because you weren't defending, you weren't counterattacking, you were just existing exactly as you are, solid, unmoved, watching them burn fuel while you stood still. And that's when the rebound got violent. Not physically, not dramatically, but psychologically. Their confidence cracked. Their timing slipped. Their alliances started to rot. People began to notice patterns. The same people who throw stones always seem injured afterward. The same mouths that speak poison always end up choking on it. You see, force fields don't look like shields. They look like discipline, self-respect, emotional control, the ability to pause when someone wants a reaction, the ability to smile when someone wants fear, the ability to walk away when someone wants a fight. And that's what murdered them quietly, because every attack needs a receiver. Every insult needs an ego. Every manipulation needs insecurity, and you weren't offering any of that anymore. So their moves turned inward, self-sabotage disguised as confidence, rage disguised as power, desperation disguised as strategy. They started tripping over their own words, exposing their motives, overplaying their hand, making mistakes you didn't even have to point out, because the rebound effect was already working. People don't notice the shield. They notice the attacker falling apart, and that's when fear set in. Not fear of you doing something. Fear of you doing nothing. Fear of you staying exactly where you are while they self-destruct in real time. Because silence plus stability is terrifying to unstable minds. Every attack murdered them back a little more. Their sleep, their reputation, their focus, their sense of control. And the craziest part is you never touched them, never raised your voice, never stepped into their chaos. You just let momentum do its job. Let emotional physics take over. Let insecure people collide with their own energy. Because when someone throws hate at a wall, that doesn't crack. Eventually their hands do, and they can't tell anyone it was their own fault. So they keep throwing, bleeding more each time, convincing themselves the next hit will be different, that the next scheme will finally break you, not realizing the force field isn't around you. It's inside you, built from clarity, patience, and the calm understanding that people reveal themselves fastest when you let them act without interference. When you don't save them from their own impulses, when you don't interrupt their downfall, when you just stand there, watching as every move they make tightens the loop around their own neck, watching their attacks turn into evidence, watching their rage turn into weakness, watching their obsession turn into collapse, watching the rebound grow stronger and faster until the only thing left for them to fight is the mess they created and the reflection they can't escape, and the realization that you were never their enemy. You were just the mirror they kept punching while it stayed perfectly still. They assumed noise was power, that reacting first meant winning, that the loudest voice controlled the room. But you learned something they never did. Control doesn't announce itself. It settles in quietly. It watches. It waits. It lets other people expose their intentions while it stays unreadable. And that silence of yours became unbearable to them. Because when you don't answer, they have to talk more. When you don't defend, they have to justify. When you don't explain, they have to invent stories just to feel important. And every extra word they spilled made them weaker. Not you, they wanted you emotional, wanted your pulse racing, wanted your pride hooked so they could drag you wherever they pleased. But you chose restraint, and restraint is violent in its own way, because it denies them access. It locks the doors they were counting on. They kept poking, teasing, provoking, hoping to find a crack, but all they found was calm. And calm is terrifying to people who survive on chaos, because it reflects everything they're trying to hide. Your silence wasn't empty. It was loaded. Every pause was pressure. Every moment you didn't respond made them fill the space with insecurity. They started replaying conversations in their head, second-guessing their moves, wondering what you knew, wondering what you were planning. Even though you weren't planning anything at all, you were just grounded, present, unbothered. And that made them spiral, because a controlled mind doesn't need to strike back. It lets unstable minds destroy themselves. They mistook restraint for weakness at first. That's always the opening mistake. They thought you were scared, tired, unaware. But then the pattern showed itself. Every time they pushed harder, they looked worse. Every time they tried to expose you, they exposed themselves. Every time they tried to dominate the situation, they lost control of their emotions, and people noticed. Not because you pointed it out, but because you didn't interfere. You let the imbalance speak for itself. Control is knowing when not to move, knowing when not to speak, knowing when silence will do more damage than words ever could. And while they were burning energy, trying to provoke you, you were conserving yours, watching the rhythm, seeing the desperation creep into their voice, seeing the cracks form in their confidence. Because nothing rattles a manipulator more than someone who refuses to be manipulated. They started projecting, accusing you of things they were doing, imagining motives that didn't exist, turning you into a threat in their own mind just to justify their obsession. And the more they obsessed, the more unhinged they appeared. Because obsession is loud, it leaks, it can't hide, while discipline stays quiet, clean, surgical. You didn't need to prove anything. Didn't need validation, didn't need revenge. and that absence of need stripped them of leverage, because control only works on people who are hungry for approval, hungry for recognition, hungry for reaction, and you had already stepped past that stage. You understood that the strongest response is often none at all, that the sharpest move is stillness, that letting someone reveal their worst side publicly while you remain composed is a kind of domination they can't counter. Their aggression kept bouncing back because it had nowhere to land. Your mind was locked, your emotions guarded, your focus intact, and without access to those, all their tactics collapsed inward, turning into stress, paranoia, overreaction, sloppy mistakes. They were fighting shadows while you stood in the light, untouched, watching the silence do the work, watching control dismantle chaos, watching their need to win expose how badly they were already losing. They never realized the moment things flipped, the exact second when you stopped absorbing damage and started converting it. Because transformation is quiet, it doesn't come with fireworks or announcements. It comes with awareness, with that slow internal shift where you stop taking things personally and start seeing patterns instead. And once you see patterns, people lose their power over you, because now you're not reacting to emotions. You're observing behavior, motives, timing, repetition. And observation is lethal to anyone running on impulse. At first they thought you were lucky. Then they thought you were protected. Then they thought you were cheating the system somehow. But the truth was simpler and more dangerous. You had changed the rules internally. You stopped letting external pressure define your worth. And the moment that happened, every attack lost its target, because attacks only work when they hit identity, when they shake self-image, when they trigger fear. And you had already dismantled all of that inside yourself. They kept throwing the same tactics, because insecure people recycle moves. They don't innovate, they just escalate volume. More criticism, more sarcasm, more passive aggression, more public shots disguised as jokes. But none of it landed. It slid off you, not because you were numb, but because you were clear. You knew who you were. You knew what you were building. And clarity is armor that doesn't look like armor. What really destroyed them was the delay, the space between their attack and your non-reaction, because that pause gave their mind time to turn inward, to question itself, to replay the moment, to wonder why you didn't respond the way you used to, why you didn't flinch, why you didn't chase their approval or their apology. And in that space, their confidence started to rot, because confidence built on control collapses when control disappears. They tried to provoke urgency, to rush you, to force a response, because urgency is how manipulators regain power. But you stayed slow, deliberate, unbothered, and slowness drives frantic minds insane. They started making mistakes, contradicting themselves, revealing intentions too early, pushing narratives that didn't make sense. And the more they talked, the more obvious it became who was unstable and who was solid. You weren't absorbing their chaos anymore. You were reflecting it, not intentionally, not maliciously, just naturally, like a mirror doesn't attack. It simply shows. And people hate mirrors when they don't like what they see. Every time they lashed out, they saw themselves clearer, petty, reactive, emotional, obsessed, while you remained composed, focused, grounded. And that contrast was humiliating. They couldn't accuse you of anything real. So they started accusing you of being different, distant, cold, changed, as if growth were a crime, as if control were arrogance. as if peace were manipulation. But those accusations only revealed their fear, because people get angry when they lose access, when they can't press the same buttons anymore, when their old influence stops working. Your force wasn't aggression. It was independence, emotional independence, mental independence, the ability to stand alone without needing validation or revenge. And that kind of independence terrifies anyone who relies on reactions to feel powerful, because now they had no leverage, no hooks, no angles, nothing to grab onto. The rebound wasn't dramatic. It was cumulative: sleepless nights, overthinking, paranoia, strained relationships, self-inflicted pressure. Because while they were busy monitoring you, watching your moves, interpreting your silence, you were living, building, improving, and progress is the cruelest response of all, because it proves their attacks were irrelevant. They didn't lose because you fought better. They lost because they fought alone, trapped in their own mind, shadowboxing an opponent who had already moved on. Every strike they threw drained them further. Every scheme tightened their stress. Every attempt to break you reminded them that you were already unbreakable. Not because nothing could hurt you, but because you no longer let hurt decide who you were. And once someone reaches that point, attacks stop being weapons and start becoming evidence of the attacker's weakness.